Hey everybody, Pastor Chris here. I am back from a military school I was at that I finished last Friday, graduating from what is the Army calls Captain's Career Course to make myself eligible for a promotion. And glad to be back, glad to finally have some time to really focus on the church, and as we're gearing up for fall and trying to figure out how are we going to be the church this fall when things are so different from what they were last fall when we were preparing. And so the first thing I want to say is that we are going to be going back to two services beginning on September 6th, which is the first Sunday of September. We'll be going back to two services because we're kind of pushing our limit of what we're comfortable with at one. We had 35 people at our last service last Sunday, and that really is what we can do comfortably at the church at this time with our setup. We could have a few more, but we've decided we're going to go to two services beginning September 6th. We'll have an 8:30 service, and we'll have a 10:30 service, so that gives us an hour in between. So we can make sure things like the bathrooms have been sanitized and public places like that. And so there'll be an email coming out about that also very soon. But just so you know, starting September 6th, 8:30 and 10:30, the services, if you've been going or have been to the one service we've been doing, it will look just like that, but it'll be 8:30 and 10:30. We're going to continue doing the full service and also have available just the sermon online through the website, through YouTube, and through Facebook. That will continue. We are hoping that end of September, beginning of October, we'll have new internet service here at the church, and we'll actually then be able to live stream our services, at least one of the services, probably the 10:30 service, though that hasn't been decided yet, will be live, that you can watch that live. We have a few things we need to work out, some logistics, some technical things, also trying to figure out on the music, because there's certain music we can use in church, but we don't have the right to rebroadcast it. So we're working on those things, but that should be end of September, early October. You'll be able to see live services on the internet, on Facebook and on YouTube, as we broadcast live during church. Wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about my sermon this coming Sunday also. I've been preaching this summer through the Gospel of Matthew, particularly sort of the middle part of the Gospel of Matthew, as Jesus is traveling around preaching and teaching, and have been doing that. And so this past Sunday, if you've not seen the sermon yet or you weren't at the service, I talked about when Peter gives his famous confession when Jesus asks, who do you say I am? And he confesses that they believe he is the Christ, the Messiah, that is the chosen one of God, and the Son of the living God. And so I talked about how we got there. But this Sunday now we're going to talk about immediately what Jesus says once Peter says that. Because he says to Peter, you are blessed because you didn't figure this out on your own. Nobody taught this to you. God has revealed this to you. And so they're expecting one thing, but now Jesus is going to turn around and say, you've got it right who I am, but it's going to look very different than what you thought. So the first thing in Matthew chapter 16, verse 21, it says, from then on, Jesus began to show them that he must go to Jerusalem, that it's necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, and that he's going to suffer terrible things, and that he's going to die and rise again on the third day. And this is a shock to the disciples. They finally figured out who Jesus is, that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, the one God has chosen to restore Israel, though they don't understand what that restoration looks like. And so when Jesus says this, Peter takes Jesus aside and begins to reprimand him. He begins to, sort of the old biblical term is rebuke him and say that God forbid that this happened. It cannot be God's will for this to happen. I like the way the biblical scholar N.T. Wright translates that, he paraphrases it, he says, that's the last thing God would want, Peter says. In my sermon, I'm going to talk about how here is something that's good. Peter says, it's good. The Messiah has come. And it would be good for the Messiah now to get to work restoring Israel. But when God laid this plan, he didn't consult with Peter. God made this plan on his own, and it's a good thing because Peter would have got it wrong. Just like I would get it wrong, or any of us would get it wrong, because God's plan goes against how we think it should be. And this happens in life sometimes. We have good intentions. Maybe even the thing we did is a good thing, but then it gets twisted somehow and actually brings about the opposite of what we wanted to happen. And we see that time and time again. And actually what Jesus says to Peter is reminiscent of what Jesus says to Satan in the wilderness in chapter 4 in Matthew, when he says, go away, Satan, get behind me, Satan. He says that then to Peter. So that's what we're going to talk about on Sunday. It's an amazing passage. It's a very counterintuitive passage because even though we confess that we believe God is all-knowing and all-powerful, he is omniscient, that we see the way that he has chosen to bring restoration to us is not through power, but through weakness. And that our natural bent, part of our broken human experience is just the opposite. That we want to use power to get things done when God says, no, there's a time and a place for that. But when it comes to the restoration of humanity, the best way to do that is not through power, but through weakness. And we see there's a real fundamental characteristic of God in that way that God has acted that we miss all too often. So we're going to be preaching on Matthew 16, verses 21 to 28. I would also point your attention, if you want to look at some related verses I'm going to talk about in the sermon, you can look at Ezekiel chapter 16 or Esther chapter 9. If you read them, you might not exactly see how they relate, but I will talk about it on Sunday. And so I just give you God's blessings for the rest of the week. I pray that you will be able to find wholeness and joy in these difficult times. And we will see you Sunday. Thanks.